Hi, my name is Sandro. I'm with Galfer Braking Systems, and we're going to be talking about Galfer Rotors today.
And I'm Aaron. I'm going to be assisting him in doing so.
Well, the wave rotor was invented by Galfer. It was done so back in 1991-92. Originally, the idea was to make a rotor that would clean the water off of trials bikes. As trials riders would go through rivers and stuff, they would completely lose their brake as they came out of their wet crossing section. And thus we made this design so it would remove the water from the surface. As we started to play with that idea, we realized that we were removing water, so we had a self-cleaning action. We were also reducing weight, and we were also getting lots of good temperature readings. Happy, where temperature on the brake pad was not very high. So as time went by, we were able to pass that idea from a very light motorcycle to a very heavy motorcycle, such as a road racer, and develop the idea of changing the feel of how we were grinding the material, using different composites on the material, but always reducing a little bit the weight and increasing the amount of friction. How did we increase the amount of friction? Well, if you look at the wave design, we have empty spots right through where the brake pad would travel. So as the brake pad travels through here, the brake pad is finding an area where the brake pad is being contacted by the rotor and an area where the brake pad is not being contacted by the rotor. That serpentine design that it's constantly traveling through the brake pad lowers the temperature when it's not being touched by the rotor, and on the other section it's just getting brake force. So as you go, if you do that at a very high RPM, what you're having is that the brake pad can release all its gases. It does not build lots of heat, and it constantly maintains lots of feel and bite. All Galfer rotors are made out of a proprietary 420 stainless steel material. It has 8 grades of carbon. It's a material that has been developed and designed over the years throughout the Galfer rotor family. We've been making rotors since 1991, and the material that we have, it's very specific to our applications.
From that point, all of our rotors are laser cut. Purpose for that is that we don't want any stress put on the material by stamping, which is what a lot of your OEM rotors will be doing because they're mass produced. So with ours, they're all laser cut so that each piece comes out identical. Rotor number 1 and rotor 10,000 they're going to be identical. There's no going to be any small difference in the tolerances between one and the other.
After the rotors are laser cut, the rotors go through a double disc grinding process and a heat treatment process. Every rotor has a heat treatment process based on its thickness and the application. So for example, a rotor for off-road, like this one right here, that it's very thin, it's about 3.5 millimeter thick, will have a certain heat treatment process. And a rotor like this one, for example, like the one that we had been running last year in some of the AMA teams, at 6 millimeter thick, this one will have a complete different heat process. What's the idea behind doing heat treatment processes? We give the rotor the ability to go to a certain temperature. So knowing that rotor is going to be used on a bike that has certain weight and certain speed will allow us to build a rotor specifically for that heat treatment process. This rotor, under extreme heat, it's going to flex. It's going to, if you were to look at it at a microscope, you would see how the rotor, it's doing one of these wavy sort of crazy things. The elasticity on the material, it's very high, but as the rotor cools off, the rotor wants to go back to its original position. If your original position, it's not maintained, then it's when you have a warped rotor. Our material, it has lots of memory retention because the way we treat it also, we don't stamp it, we laser cut them, so they're treated very nicely. And as the rotor cools off, it will go back to its original flat position, and that's what we sustain as good memory retention or warp resistance. Double disc ground, it's basically a grinding process in which we ground the right and the left side of the rotor at the same time, so that it's parallel ground. Both sides of the rotor are flat within each other. So there is no way that we would have a rotor that would come out slightly off on one side or the other. When we do the grinding, there's different types of textures that you can use to the grinding, and again, that depends on where the rotor is going to be used. Depending also on what kind of, if we go to the specifics of racing, depending sometimes on what kind of rider is going to be using that rotor, we can give it a more aggressive texture or less aggressive texture.
And that's actually one of the reasons we came out with our floating rear rotor. There's a few people in the AMA paddock who tend to get on the rear brake a little bit harder than most, so they needed a little bit more when it came to the rear brake, and so we gave them the option of having a rear floating rotor, which helps keep constant contact between the caliper and the rotors and pads itself, so better overall braking on the rear. Going back into our Superbike rotors, one of the other benefits of this design is that among all of the processes that the rotors are put through, whether it being the laser cutting, the heat treating, the double disc grinding, we also put the Superbike rotors through a cryo treating process. And the reason for that is, again, it helps temper the metal for warp resistance, and it's going to give you a better, more consistent material by the way that it's able to, I guess, redistribute the material of the rotor itself. People come up to us a lot of times and ask us, why does the rotor for my Hayabusa look different than the rotor for my CRF? And the reason behind that is all of the rotors are put through our CAD/CAM Cosmos testing, which is a computer program that runs the design through. Plus, we dyno test the rotors before they go into production to make sure that you're not going to have any type of a weakness in any portion of the rotor, and so that each design is made for the application that it's going to be going on, and it's going to be put through the type of environment that rotor will be seeing. So we know that when we start to produce a rotor, that we know that the bike that it's going to go on is going to need certain characteristics out of the rotor itself. So that's why the design is different from an off-road rotor to a street bike rotor, because you're putting them on two different bikes.
Following the different design, we have designs that are more street-oriented and some designs that are more racing-oriented. For example, if we look at this rotor design, this would be a cup like our rotor in chrome. Regardless of chrome or non-chrome, the wave design on this one, it's just our standard wave design. It has the upper and the lower wave design. Obviously, all of these are designs that they're patented and specifically designed for the Galfer family. All the rotors are floating. That means that the inside part and the outside part, what we call the friction blade and the carrier, both of them float against each other. There's some washers in there that allow for the system to float. But you have, this would be the standard wave design. Then we have what it's called the Superbike design, for example, for street. Superbike design, it's sort of the same story. A wave on the inside and on the outside. On this one, though, we've chosen to cut a very deep, aggressive groove on the rotor. So we're going from 5 millimeter to 4 millimeter. Some instances like this one, the AMA one, it's different. But in general, the Superbike design delivers the exact same performance as the street rotor would, but at a much shortened distance and with a lot more aggressiveness. The brake torque generated on this blade versus this one, it's completely different. Always with the exact same process, laser cut, double disc ground, heat treated. But again, different designs providing different type of feel.
We have the same Tsunami version in our off-road. So for the guy who needs a little bit more aggressive bite, coming into the corners, if he's doing, motocross or arena cross, he's doing something where he is racing, he's constantly getting on the brakes. We have the same version with the extra grooving for, added cooling and the more aggressive bite. We have that version in the off-road as well.
There's lots of race teams on the AMA Supercross right now running with that design, what we call the Tsunami design.
One new thing that we've added to the Galfer lineup is the availability of colored aluminum floating buttons. So now you're able to ask your dealer, for the set of rotors that you're purchasing, that they come with a set of red buttons. And that's something that we're offering to you. When you purchase the set of rotors, you can now get them customized to fit your bike, just like the brake lines.